The lakeside promenade stretched languidly along the shimmering waters of Lake Waits, its cobblestone paths meandering beneath a canopy of ancient willows that swayed like morning spirits in the breeze. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers, yet a heavy tension clung to the atmosphere, a stark contrast to the lake's tranquil beauty. Gideon Ulysses walked slowly, his long, flowing dark cloak trailing behind him. Memories flickered in the corners of his mind like shadows cast by the waning sun. Each step on the uneven stones felt weighted by the ghosts of past failures, decisions made and lost opportunities that haunted him. He paused at a bench, its paint peeling like the remnants of his hope, and closed his eyes, allowing the echoes of previous peace talks to swirl around him, igniting a familiar dread. Yet, even amidst the haunting silence, a voice broke through, gruff and measured. "You still think you can change anything, Gideon?"
The tone belonged to Nero Quintus, his stocky frame emerging from the shadows like a specter of doubt.
He leaned against a gnarled willow, arms crossed, his serpent tattoo coiling menacingly around his forearm. Gideon opened his eyes, the faint tremor of anxiety racing through him. The conflict between their worlds had begun amid whispered dreams of peace. Gideon inhaled deeply, steeling himself. Every moment is a chance to atone for what we've lost. If only his voice faltered. The weight of unfulfilled promises hung heavy between them, igniting a flare of frustration. "You were part of that loss too. Don't you want something better?" Nero scoffed, shaking his head, the flicker of disdain evident in his dark brown eyes. "Better is a fairy tale, Ulysses. The world is not made of dreams, it's made of blood and betrayal. You think you can walk these paths and not feel the consequences." His words were like stones thrown into the still water, rippling outward, distorting the fragile peace Gideon strived for. Gideon clenched his fists, feeling the rough fabric of his trousers against his palms. The infamous heist site loomed ahead, a physical manifestation of betrayal, a place where hopes had been shattered. Shadows danced across the cobblestones, whispering reminders of choices and regrets.
"I can't stand by and do nothing, hero."
"I owe it to them," to mediate, his voice quavered, a blend of determination and despair as he faced his own reflection in the watery depths. Closing portal and hook. Nero stepped closer, the space between them shrinking, tension crackling like static electricity. "And what if your doing leads to more suffering? What if you fail again?" His challenge hung in the air, charged with the weight of history. Gideon's heart raced, the fear clawing at his resolve, yet beneath it simmered a flicker of courage. He took a breath, the faint scent of rain approaching on the breeze. "Then I learned from it. But I won't give up. Not again." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows as Gideon made his choice, setting the stage for a confrontation that would take everything, or ended it once and for all. Nero stepped close, the space between them shrinking, tension crackling like static electricity. "And what if your doing leads to more suffering? What if you fail again?" His challenge hung in the air, charged with the weight of history. Gideon's heart raced, the fear clawing at his resolve, yet beneath it simmered a flicker of courage. He took a breath, the faint scent of rain approaching on the breeze. "Then I learned from it. But I won't give up. Not again." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows as Gideon made his choice, setting the stage for a confrontation that would take everything, or ended it once and for all. The town square of Waits Dead pulsed with life, the air thick with the mingling scents of roasted chestnuts and fresh paint. punctuated by interludes of laughter and spirited conversation. In the center, under the watchful gaze of the ancient stone clock tower, a canvas draped in a heavy cloth awaited its unveiling. Sunlight filtered through the foliage of nearby sycamores, casting dappled patterns on the cobblestones where townsfolk bathed, their faces a blend of curiosity and anticipation. Gideon Ulysses stood on the periphery, his fingers curling tightly around the strap of his leather sachet. He felt the weight of the crowd, the electric tension thrumming beneath the surface, as if the air itself held its breath in expectation. Today, everything could change. The air was charged with hope and fear. A sudden hush fell over the crowd. The artist, a wiry figure with wild hair and paint-stained clothes, stood before the canvas, his hands trembling with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "This is for all of us," he called out, his voice a beacon cutting through the murmurs. With his swift motion, he pulled away the cloth, revealing a sprawling mural that depicted a chaotic scene of oppression and rebellion. Colors clashed violently. Figures were twisted in anguish yet radiated an undeniable strength. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath, as the image of a broken chain shimmered at the center, a symbol of freedom that sparked a fire in their hearts. Gideon felt his pulse quicken, hope igniting within him like a fragile flame caught in a tempest of emotions. As the impact of the painting washed over the crowd, shouts erupted, swelling into an anthem for change. "We will not be silenced," one voice cried, bolstered by another, then another, until the melody of rebellion filled the square. Gideon stepped further forward, his heart racing as he caught the fervor in their eyes. The artist's vision had transformed despair into a rallying cry, a wave of emotion crashing over him. It turned to his wise mentor, an older woman with silver hair and steady hands, standing beside him. "Do you see this? They're ready to stand again. Maybe we can find a way to channel this energy, to negotiate peace." His voice trembled with the weight of his hopes, mingling with the rising tide of the crowd chants. But lurking at the edge, Nero Quintus, the embodiment of the oppressive regime, glowered at the scene, his stocky face rigid with rage. "This madness will only lead to chaos," he barked, his dark eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for a weakness to exploit. Gideon's heart sank at the sight of Viv, the embodiment of everything he had once feared. And yet, the fire of outrage among the people ignited a resolve within him. He took a step forward, drawing breath against the mounting anxiety. The artist, emboldened, shouted above the din, "Art speaks where words fail." "We will not hide in shadows any longer." The crowd surged with renewed vigor, chanting louder, a pulse of rebellion that threatened to drown out even Nero's fury. Gideon's chest swelled with a mixture of hope and dread. He understood the stakes had escalated the struggle. For peace was no longer an abstract concept, but a vivid, breathing entity. He could almost feel the energy forge connections, weaving a tapestry of unity among the townsfolk. Yet, he also sensed the darkness that swirled along Nero, a storm brewing at the edges of their newfound hope. As the crowd roared their demands, Gideon knew this was only the beginning. At what would he be willing to sacrifice to ensure that this moment didn't slip into chaos? The taste of determination tinging his thoughts, mingling with the bittersweet aroma of conflict. The battle for Waite's debtor was just unfolding, and the artist at brush had unleashed a power that could either heal or destroy everything they held dear. As the chants echoed through the square, Gideon caught a glimpse of the artist, illuminated by the fervor of the crowd, his face a canvas of fervent belief. Hope surged through him, tempered by the realization of what lay ahead. He met his mentor's gaze, a silent question hanging between them. Could they harness this momentum for peace? But before he could voice the thought, a loud crash erupted from the fringes, a sound that sent ripples of fear cascading through the crowd. Nero fury had surfaced, and the stakes had heightened dramatically. Gideon tightened his grip on his sachet, heart thundering as he prepared to step into the fray. This could be the moment he had long gone for, or the very edge of disaster. Either way, he knew he had to act, and quickly. The hidden basement of the rebellion headquarters whispered of secrets and shadows, its dim light flickering like a heartbeat beneath the surface of the world above. Stone walls, slick with moisture, embraced the damp metallic scent of uncertainty that linger in the air. A flickering lantern cast eerie shapes that danced along the rough-hewn beams overhead. Gideon Ulysses stepped into the space, his long dark cloak trailing behind him like a specter. The murmurs of rebellion leaders swirled in the oppressive atmosphere, the weight of their gazes heavy as they turned toward him. It was a gathering charged with anticipation, taut with the threads of hope and skepticism. And at the center stood Gideon, feeling the crushing weight of his own past failures. Be he prepared to speak. Gideon took a breath, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and unspoken grievances. I know the scars we bear are deep, but we can't let our past failures define us, not now. I propose we approach the council again together. A renewed peace process that acknowledges our losses, but dares to dream of something brighter. He glanced at Doe, catching the eyes of the rebellion leaders, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and anger, storm clouds gathering on the horizon. One leader, a stocky ague, with a serpent tattoo coiling around his forearm, snorted derisively. And what makes you think they'll listen this time? They've already shown us what they think of our dreams. Gideon. The voice of Nero Quintus, his wise mentor, rumbled behind it. Steady the earth beneath their feet. Gideon speaks truth, but we must not sugarcoat the reality of our situation. If we approach them, it will not be with naive optimism, but with hard-earned resolve. You have a chance to guide us differently, to confront this with the courage you possess. It was a flicker of hope in the dimness, but Gideon could feel his heart falter. Could he truly bear the burden of their faith when his own was so riddled with doubt? The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, and he felt the tension radiating from the leaders, coiling like a serpent ready to strike. We're tired of empty promises. Gideon, a woman, injected, her voice rising above the rest, sharp as shattered glass. Every time we've put our hopes in you, it ended in tragedy. You want to broker peace? What makes you think they'll take you seriously? Her anger lay heavy in the air, and at of the past their gatherings were steep pep in. Gideon resolve waver, the years of regret pressing down. He caught sight of Nero's unwavering gaze. It rooted hid, igniting a spark of determination even as self-doubt clawed at the edges of his mind. This was the moment he had to seize, a chance to transcend the weight of their shared history, to stand for what he believed in despite the odds. With a sudden clarity, Gideon stepped forward, his voice firm yet laced with vulnerability. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for a chance to make it right. To confront our enemies, not as fractured souls but as united voices. If we want change, we must be the change. I commit myself to this cause, and I hope you will join me in the endeavor. The room fell silent, the flickering lantern now a beacon of his resolve, but outside the basement walls, the storm continued to brew. Would they follow Hill into the tempest, or would his past failures drown his renewed hopes in an unforgiving sea? The rebellion leaders exchanged glances, their expressions inscrutable, as if weighing the gravity of Gideon's declaration alongside the scars of their collective history. The air crackled with uncertainty, tension coiling tighter as they deliberated in silence, the flickering shadows casting doubt on the very foundation of his plea. Just as Gideon felt the weight of his heart begin to drift, a voice broke through the murmur of contemplation, a voice filled with fierce resolve and unyielding sorrow. "You want to confront the council? Then know this, we go in with our eyes wide open, but we do it without you, Gideon. You've lost our faith, and it's gonna take more than words to win it back." Each word landed like a stone in a pool, sending ripples of conflict through the room, leaving Gideon standing on the precipice of despair. The journey for redemption now more precarious than ever. The underground meeting hall breathed an air thick with tension, its low ceilings shadowed by flickering lanterns that cast erratic patterns on the stone walls. Gideon Ulysses stepped into the cavern, his dark cloak trailing like ink on parchment, each footfall echoing the weight of his resolve. The murmurs of resistance filled the space, punctuated by the harsh scrape of chairs against the rough floor as the rebellion leaders turned their skeptical gazes towards him. Their faces, hardened by distrust, glimmer in the dim light, and Gideon felt the familiar prickle of anxiety creep along his spine. The air smelled of damp earth and stale smoke, a reminder of the underground clandestine purpose, and it settled around him like a shroud as he approached the imposing table at the center. Peace in Roquence's voice sliced through the air as sharp and polished as his tailored suit. His dark eyes glinted with disdain, radiating an authority that was as palpable as the dampness in the room. "You come me, after everything after you failed us, and think you can just propose a meat hacket again." His laughter resonated, harsh and mocking, drawing murmurs of agreement from his fellow leaders. Gideon felt their scorn like a physical blow, each chuckle a dagger aimed at his fragile hope. It clenched the leather strap of his sachet, grounding himself against the tide of derision. The wise mentor, a fit of quiet strength, leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table, attempting to bridge the chasm of hostility. "Listen, we all want the same goal," he injected, his voice a soothing balm against the rising tempers. Yet the leaders merely rolled their eyes, dismissing his words as they whispered bitter insults. Gideon's heart raced, the double-edged sword of his anxiety and determination clashing within him. "What if we truly collaborated?" he ventured, the weight of his past failures. What if we could build something greater together?" His voice rang out with a fervor he struggled to contain. But the leaders merely exchanged scornful glances, their skepticism a wall he could not breach. As the laughter subsided, Gideon felt the cavern close in on him, the air thickening with their disdain. With each passing moment, isolation wrapped itself around him, tightening like a noose. "You're dreaming, Ulysses," one of the leaders muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. In that moment, Gideon understood the chasm was not just one of vision, but of belief, a collective refusal to hope. The flickering lantern seemed to dim further, and he stood on the precipice, teetering between despair and determination, aware that that meeting, this moment, could define the trajectory of his quest for peace. But the path ahead felt increasingly fraught, and the darkness of the hall mirrored the uncertainty of the future, propelling him deeper into the struggle for redemption. The meeting hall was steeped in an uneasy silence, its stone walls echoing with the weight of unspoken fears and fragmented hopes. Flickering torches cast shadows that danced across the faces of the rebellion leaders, their expressions a mix of skepticism and resolve, as they sat around a heavy, scarred table. Gideon Ulysses stood at the center, his slim frame cloaked in dark fabric that caught the faint drafts, accentuating the tension in the air. The chill of the evening seeped into his bones, amplifying the memories of past failures that claw at the edges of his resolve. He squared his shoulders, steeling himself against the tide of doubt swelling within him, the scent of damp stone and burnt wood wrapping round him like a shroud of anxiety. It was not just another meeting, it was a battle, not only for peace, but for his redemption. Gideon's voice trembled as he spoke, each word heavy with the weight of his convictions. We must seek a path of dialogue, not destruction. The cost of war is too high, and we have faltered. The image of the last meeting flashing through his mind. The bitter faces, the deafening silence after his proposal had been met with jeers. Memories of the bloodshed that followed claw at his composure. A bead of sweat trickled down his brow as his gaze darted to Nero. Quintus, the stocky leader, whose skepticism was palpable. You think peace is possible? You're dreaming, Ulysses. Nero interrupted, his dark gaze sharp as a blade. You failed once, and yet you are asking us to trust you again. With every dismissive word from the leaders, Gideon's heart sank further, the room closing in on him like a vice. He glanced at the wise mentor, an elderly woman with silver hair, who offered a slight nod of encouragement. But even that flicker of support felt distant against the tide of doubt. The rebellion leaders began to rise one by one, their chairs scraping against the stone with a final lull that echoed in the empty hall. Gideon swallowed hard, his throat constricting. His resolve felt as fragile as the flickering light, and he could hear the rush of blood in his ears as they turned their backs on him. Wait, he called out, desperation lacing his tone.
I won't give them.
We cannot divide ourselves further. We must reach out to the other factions. The last figure vanished through the heavy oak door, leaving Gideon standing alone, exposed to the flickering shadows that now seemed to mock him. The chamber felt emptier, the stale air thick with the remnants of unfulfilled promises. He clenched his fists at his sides, the leather of his sachet digging into his palm, a reminder of the mission still ahead. This was not the end. He would seek out the dissenters, the silenced voices, and craft a new path forward. With a deep breath, he turned toward the exit, his heart pound with a newfound determination. He would let this failure defile him. He would yield to despair. The journey was just beginning, and he would walk it alone. As he stepped into the cool night, the weight of the hall lifted slightly, replaced by the distant murmur of the lake waters against the shore, a reminder of the peace he sought. The stars shimmer above, indifferent yet hopeful, urging him to forge connections that could change the course of their struggle. Gideon felt a flicker of resolve spark within him, a reminder that he had not come this far to surrender. He would find the courage to reach out, to gather those who still believed in the dream of peace, and shoulder the burden of their hopes. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. He would rest until he had given everything to restore harmony to Waits Delta. The market square of Waits Delta pulsed with life, a cacophony of voices and vibrant colors swirling around the vendor's cart. Overhead, the sun cast a warm golden hue, illuminating the tapestry of goods, fresh fruits, glistening with moisture, intricate textiles draped like jewels, and the enticing scent of spiced meats wafting through the air. Yet, beneath this lively facade, an air of suspicion lingered. Gideon Ulysses, cloaked in a dark robe that whispered against the cobblestones, threaded his way through the throngs, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm in his chest. The prominent scar over his left eyebrow deepened with each wary glance thrown his way. The government propaganda posters plastered across the walls, declaring him a traitor, each word a dagger in his resolve. He was heeded to gather support, but the weight of isolation pressed heavily upon him, threatening to crush the fragile hope he clutched like a lifeline. Gideon approached a stall draped in vivid fabrics, the vendor eyeing him with a mixture of intrigue and aversion. "You shouldn't be head, Ulysses," the vendor muttered, his fingers absently tugging at the edge of a cloth, the colors vibrant yet somehow muted in the charged atmosphere. "You've bo enough trouble already." Gideon met the man's gaze, a flicker of desperation igniting within him. "I come not to sow discord, but to unite. We all want peace, don't we?" The crowd shifted, murmurs bubbling on like a restless tide, their faces hardening under the weight of his words. As he continued through the square, conversations dwindled, the banter of market ties stifled by an unseen hand. Children paused mid-laughter, their mothers casting him furtive, disapproving looks. Gideon's throat tightened as he caught the gaze of Nero, Quintus, the stocky leader of a rival faction, whose tattoo forearm gleamed ominously in the sunlight. "You think you can just walk in hen and change hearts?" Nero barked, stepping forward, his voice low and menacing. "You're a ghost of past failures, Ulysses. No one believes in your empty words anymore." The crowd shifted uneasily, glances darting between Gideon and the imposing figure, the tension thickening like fog around them. With a sudden surge of desperation, Gideon turned to face the crowd, the weight of their stares pressing down. "Listen to me." His voice quivered, yet he stood tall, a flicker of his former confidence igniting in the depths of his chest. "We are on the brink of losing everything we hold dear. Together, we could forge a path to unity and peace. Do not let the shadows of the past dictate our future." The square fell silent, the air electric with disbelief as whispers filled the void. Some shook their heads, their mistrust palpable, while others exchanged furtive glances, as if the very act of listening might brand them traitor. Too. He could feel their skepticism like a cold wind sweeping through the square, snuffing out the flicker of hope he had tried to ignite. As Gideon stepped back, his heart sank under the weight of the crowd disdain. The faces he once knew bore no recognition, only a wall of skepticism that felt insurmountable. Nero's smirk cacked, the corners of his mouth curling with triumph, rattling the moment. Beneath the cacophony of voices returning to their mundane exchanges, Gideon felt utterly alone, his call for unity fading into the din like a whisper lost in a storm. With a heavy heart, he turned away, each step feeling like a retreat. But deep within, a flicker of determination remained, a whispered promise that this battle was far from over, and he would find another way to reach them, even if it meant risking everything once more. Yet, even as Gideon walked away from the marketplace, the weight of despair clung to him like the dust rising from the cobblestones. It could not shake the feeling that he was at a precipice, teetering on the brink of a revelation that could either bind him to his past failures or propel him forward into uncharted territory. The faces, their fear, their anger, were etched in his mind, fueling a burning resolve. He would seek out allies in the shadows, those who still dared to dream of peace. With every heartbeat, he could almost hear the rallying cry beneath the noise of skepticism, a reminder that the struggle was just beginning. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows, Gideon knew that he would falter, not this time. The air in Nero Quintus's office was thick with the scent of polished wood and stale ambition, an unsettling cocktail that clung to the opulent decor. Gilded frames adorned the walls, each containing portraits of long-dead dignitaries whose eyes seemed to follow Gideon Ulysses. He stepped across the threshold, his dark cloak trailing behind him like a spectre. The room, drenched in warm hues of amber, felt more like a gilded cage than a seat of power. Gideon's heart thrummed in his chest, a muted ebb of defiance against the plush upholstery and the imposing desk that stood between him and the man he sought to confront. Today, he would cower. He would demand the truth, even if it meant navigating the treacherous waters of this corrupt official domain. "Ah, Gideon," Nero's voice oozed with condescension, cutting through the heavy silence. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled as if contemplating the audacity of the man before him. What brings you to my humble abode? Surely, you have better pursuits than questioning the integrity of those in power. His dark eyes glinted with amusement, a predator delighting in the game. The arrogance in his tone sent a shiver down Gideon's spine, but he clenched his jaw, willing his resolve to harden like iron under the weight of intimidation. Those in power should be held accountable. Gideon replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. What you've done, what you continue to do, leaves no room for the dreams of those who still dare to hope for peace. Gestured emphatically to the mountain of paperwork on Nero's desk. The weight of decisions made and lives altered pressing upon him like a physical force. The people deserve answers, and I won't rest until the truth is uncovered. The tension crackled in the air, an electric current that neither could ignore. Gideon felt the moment stretch, a taut wire ready to snap, as he searched Nero's face for any sign of vulnerability. Nero's laughter rang out, mirthless and sharp as glass. You think your quixotic crusade will change anything? You're just a man with delusions of grandeur. Quit my authority again, and you may find that the shadows hold secrets darker than your noble intentions. The threat laced into his words hung heavily between them, but Gideon stood firm, his heart roaring with a newfound courage. This confrontation was not merely about him, it was a stand against a tide of corruption that threatened to drown the soul of Waite's Delta. As he turned to leave, the weight of uncertainty still pressed upon him, but beneath it lay a flicker of hope, a commitment to unearth the truth, no matter the cost. The quiet cafe on the edge of town was steep in shadows, its dim lighting casting a warm glow over chipped wooden tables and faded wallpaper, remnants of a more vibrant past. The air was rich with the aroma of dark roasted coffee and a hint of cinnamon, wrapping round Gideon Ulysses like an old, comforting cloak. He sat at a small table, fingers tracing the rim of his cup, waiting for Nero Quintus to arrive. Outside, the wind whispered through the ancient willow lining the lakeside promenade, sending a chill through the air that mirrored the unease settling in his chest. As the door creaked open, a gust of cold air swept in, stirring the scent of damp earth and discontent. Gideon looked up, his gray eyes flecked with blue, betraying a mix of apprehension and resolve busy, prepared to confront the man who once stood and a pillar against the tide of corruption. Nero entered with a measured stride, his stocky form silhouetted against the pale light streaming in. The tattoo of a serpent coiling within his forearm seemed to pulse with the life of its own as he approached. You troubled, Gideon?" he remarked, sliding onto the seat opposite, his voice a low rumble, seasoned with a trace of something akin to sympathy. Gideon felt the familiar knot twist in his stomach, the weight of his mission pressing down upon him. He could tell that beneath Nero's imposing exterior, a flicker of the man he once knew still lingered, but it was buried deep beneath layers of fear and pragmatism. "Nero, please." Gideon leaned in, his voice urgent yet steady. "You know this isn't right. The reports, you can't ignore them. Every day, people suffer because of what we know is happening behind closed doors. If you just only..." He hesitated, swallowing hard, fingers digging into the table edge. "If you just switch sides, we could make a real difference. You have the power to end this." The cafe round them faded into a blur. Gideon fettered on those dark, brooding eyes, searching for a sign of agreement, a glimmer of hope. But Nero shook his head, a heavy sorrow etched into the lines of his face. "I have a family, Gideon. You don't know what they'd do to me if I even considered it. I can't risk that, not for some idealistic dream. You think you're fighting for peace, but it's a delusion. They'll crush you, and I won't be the one to lead you to the slaughter." The words hit Gideon like a cold wave, leaving him gasping for breath. He felt the room closing in, the whispers of other patrons blurring into a cacophony of disbelief. Each syllable from Nero's mouth felt like a chain binding him further to his isolation, the ambiance morphing from comfort to confinement. As Nero stood to leave, the shadows of the cafe deepened, mirroring the darkness gathering within Gideon. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with a fierce determination that ignited anew. He watched as the man who had once been his ally walked away, a figure retreating into the night, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The taste of abandonment lingered bitterly on his tongue, yet beneath it a flicker of resilience sparked. It clenched his fists, resolve igniting as he forced himself to remember why he had come. He was not merely a solitary crusader. He was the voice of those who had none. The mission was bigger than one-man fear, and as the last traces of Nero disappeared into the darkness, Gideon knew he could not relent. His fight for truth had only just begun. The night wrapped around the lakeside promenade like a soft dark blanket, its silence punctuated only by the gentle lapping of lake waves against the cobblestones. Stars scattered across the sky reflected in the water, shimmering surface, creating a celestial dance that belied the tension behind Gideon Ulysses' tightly knotted brow. He sat on a weather-red bench, worn paint flaking beneath his hands, feeling the weight of his dark cloak against his shoulders, each breath heavy with unspoken thoughts. There, under the looming willows that swayed softly in the evening breeze, shadows flickered like ghosts of his past, reminding him of failures that etched deep lines into his spirit, making him question if he was worthy of the peace he sought to restore. The sudden crunch of footsteps on gravel shattered the stillness, causing Gideon to duck, heart racing. It stood Nero Quintus, his imposing figure outlined against the starry backdrop. "You've taken to brooding again, haven't you?" Nero teased, though his eyes held a depth of understanding that softened the edges of his usual bravado. Gideon offered a half-hearted smile, the corners of his mouth twitching as if caught in a web of uncertainty. "I'm just reflecting. It seems to be the only thing I'm good at these days." His voice was barely above a whisper, lost amidst the rustle of leaves and the echo of distant arguments lingering in the air. Nero stepped close, his presence a comforting weight that steadied Gideon's racing thoughts. "Reflection leads to action, Gideon. You can't let your past define your future. Every leader has scars, but it's what you do with them that matters." The mentor words hung between them, an unyielding truth. Gideon rubbed his scar with a finger, a physical reminder of the mediation gone awry, each memory a ghost that clung to him. "And what if the cost of action is too high?" he murmured, eyes searching the calm waters for answers that wouldn't come. Nero's gaze intensified, compelling and steady. "Then you weigh the cost against inaction, my friend. You fight not because you are without fear, but because you have something worth fighting for. The people of Waitstead need you to be that voice again." With a deep breath, Gideon rose, the cool air wrapping round him like a cloak of resolve. The stars shimmer above, a silent audience to his internal struggle. He took a step forward, a decision crystallizing within him, the weight of his identity as a leader, beginning to settle like a long-lost friend. He vowed to embrace his path, no matter how daunting it may be. As Gideon faced the dark waters of the lake, a newfound determination surged through him, cutting through the fog of doubt. The night whispered promises of change, of a future, crafted not just by dreams, but by tangible steps forward. He turned to Nero, an almost imperceptible nod signaling a shift in his resolve. "I will fight for peace," he declared, the words spilling forth like water over stones, steady, and true. With the stars twinkling above, a quiet yet profound energy crackled in the air. And as they stood together, Gideon felt the gravity of his choice anchor here. Ahead lay the uncharted path of leadership, and he would walk it alone. The town square of Waitstead thrummed with life, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds swirling through the crisp evening air. Gideon Ulysses stood atop a makeshift platform, his dark cloak billowing softly like the wings of a raven against the setting sun. The scent of roasted chestnuts wafted through the crowd, mingling with the earthy aroma of damp cobblestones and the faint trace of smoke from nearby fires. Shadows danced on the faces of his remaining allies, their expressions a blend of hope and trepidation. While Nero Quintus, his mentor, stood beside him, solid eying and ancient oak. The energy in the square felt electric, palpable. A collective breath held in anticipation as Gideon prepared to speak, his heart pounding like a war drum. Here, among the remnants of a fractured community, he felt the weight of his mission more than and to ignite a spark of unity and change. "Listen to me, my friends," Gideon began, his voice echoing against the stone buildings, drawing the attention of the gathering crowd. The flicker of lanterns cast a warm glow over the sea of faces, reflecting an eagerness that gnawed at his anxiety. He paused, scanning the crowd, his gaze catching the eyes of those who had once been allies in peace. "Art is not merely a luxury, it's a weapon against tyranny. It holds the power to transform our pain into purpose." His words ignited murmurs of agreement, a ripple of unity spreading through the throng. Nero stepped close, his presence like a comforting shadow, and nodded approvingly, his dark brown eyes gleaming with pride. "Gideon speaks the truth," he roared, his voice a compelling baritone that commanded respect. "We have suffered long under the weight of despair, but in our shared creativity lies the strength to rise." The crowd erupted with fervor, the sound washing over Gideon, lifting him like a wave. For the first time in months, he felt the stirring of confidence push back against the self-doubt that had haunted him since the failed negotiations. As the atmosphere thickened with determination, Gideon's words became a clarion call, urging those present to envision a world reborn through collaboration.
Gokonia.
In every brushstroke, in every note, beats the possibility of hope. Together, we could dismantle the chains that bind us. For too long, we've allowed fear to silence our voices. His heart raced, each word resonating with the fervor of his convictions, igniting a fire deep within the crowd. Faces once etched with sorrow now glowed with eagerness, an undeniable shift sparking in their collective spirit. But just as hope surged, a discordant sound echoed from the edge of the square. But just as hope surged, a discordant sound echoed from the edge of the square. A distant clatter, followed by the low rumble of approaching boots. The crowd shifted uneasily, attention crackling in the air like a summer storm. Gideon's heart sank as he caught the nervous glances exchanged between his allies. The realization that hope often dances hand in hand with danger. He clenched his fists, ready to face whatever came next, aware that the fragile unity they had begun to forge was now on the brink of a challenge. As the first figures of the government and forces emerged, the faces in the crowd shifted from hope to apprehension, uncertainty hanging thick in the air. Gideon's resolve hardened into something more than fear, became a fierce determination. He stepped forward, feeling the warmth of Nero's steady presence at his side. "Stay together," he called out, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Our strength lies in our unity. We will not be silenced." The crowd drew closer, emboldened by his declaration, and in the shadows of authority loomed larger. Gideon realized that that moment could either forge their path to freedom or tighten the bonds of oppression. The choice lay before them, and the fight for their future was only just beginning. The grand hall of the government building loomed like a fortress against the gray afternoon sky, its marble pillars rising majestically, echoing whispers of power and dread. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that crackled like static as Gideon Ulysses stepped forward, his dark cloak swirling round him like a storm cloud. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting shards of color onto the polished floor, where the fed crowd shifted uneasily, their expressions a blend of hope and apprehension. At the far end of the hall, Nero Quintus stood, arms crossed defiantly, a sinister smirk playing on his lips. The opulence of the surroundings felt mocking. Gideon steadied himself, heart pounding like a war drum, aware that today was not just a confrontation, but a reckoning for the people of Waitsville. Gideon took a deep breath, his gray eyes scanning the crowd, the loyal supporters behind him nodding in silent affirmation. For too long, our voices have been silenced by fear and lies, he declared, his voice steadying as he spoke. The murmurs rippling through the audience were like leaves rustling in an imminent storm. He could see the flicker of recognition in their faces, the dawning realization that they were not alone in their struggle. Nero, Quintus, he has fed us false promises while lining his pockets with our pain. The name hung in the air, heavy and accusatory, igniting a fire of dissent among the onlookers who had come seeking truth. Nero laughter echoed through the hall, a mocking sound that made the hairs on Gideon's neck stand on end. "Is this what you call bravery, Ulysses?" A desperate attempt to rally the rabble with baseless accusations. His voice dripped with derision, yet beneath it lay a tremor of uncertainty. The crowd's severe agitation was a palpable force, shifting the atmosphere from one of passive acceptance to active outrage. Gideon could feel the pulse of rebellion thrumming through the hall, urging him to press on, to reveal the shadows lurking in the corners of their shared history. Gideon's voice rose, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You all know the truth of his dealings. The contracts signed in darkness, the families torn apart by his greed." He stepped closer to the edge of the dais, his face illuminated by the stained glass light, casting him in a heroic glow. Gasps erupted from the crowd, as if awakened from a long sleep. Whispers of revolt began to swirl like a tempest, the air buzzing with the thrill of possibility. Nero's expression darkened, his fists tightening as he turned to face the crowd, the mask of confidence slipping as uncertainty flickered in his dark eyes. The weight of Gideon's words hung heavily in the air, igniting a flicker of hope among the crowd, morphing their gasps into murmurs of agreement.
You could see the shift faces once drawn in despair, now burning with resolve.
The loyal supporters behind him began to chant softly, a chorus of unity that echoed off the marble walls. Gideon felt a surge of adrenaline, but he also sensed the tightening grip of Nero's desperation. As the corrupt official eyes darted the hall, a plan was forming in Gideon's mind, one that could either liberate them or plunge them into deeper chaos. That confrontation was merely the beginning. The true battle for Waitsdet was only just unfolding. As dawn broke over Waitsdet, the first blush of light danced upon the tranquil surface of the lake, transforming it into a mirror of molten gold. Mist swirled languidly from the water edge, curling the gnarled roots of ancient willow that stood sentinel along the promenade. Gideon Ulysses, tall and slim, his dark cloak billowing gently in the morning breeze, stood at the water brink, his gray eyes reflecting both the day promise and the shadows of his past. Beside it, the wise mentor, a figure of quiet strength with a weather-red face and keen, perceptive eyes, observed the scene with a contemplative silence. Around them, the air buzzed with the soft murmurs of townspeople gathering, their faces lined with uncertainty yet tinged with the flicker of hope. Pull, a foe. The stories began to ripple like the lake gentle waves, stirring dreams long buried beneath the weight of chaos. Gideon shifted, the coarse fabric of his trousers brushing against his skin. He caught sight of the townspeople emerging from their homes, their footsteps hesitant yet determined on the cobblestone path. A familiar voice broke through the morning stillness, a woman with a kind smile and weathered hands gesturing animatedly as she spoke to a cluster of neighbors. "We cannot let fear write our story any longer," she declared, the conviction in her voice cutting through the lingering tension like a blade. He'd felt a surge of inspiration, a flicker of something he thought he had lost, the belief that together they could forge a new narrative, one that transcended the scars of their shared past. "I need to remind them why we're here, why this matters," Gideon thought, clenching his fists breast, his heart pound in rhythm with the distant call of a mourning dove. It turned to his mentor, whose knowing gaze was fixed upon the gathering. "They need more than words, don't they?" "They need action," Gideon said, his voice barely above a whisper. The mentor nodded thoughtfully, the current of their shared history wrapping round them like a cloak, warm yet heavy. "Yes, but actions must be rooted in understanding. Lead with empathy. Gideon, let them feel your conviction." With a deep breath, Gideon stepped forward, the cobblestones cool beneath his feet. The townspeople turned towards him, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. "I know the echoes of our past haunt us still," he began, his voice steadying he met their gazes. "But look round, the dawn is set, and so are we. Together, we could choose to rewrite our fate. Let's share our stories, our truths. Let's build something new, something that can withstand the storms of yesterday." His heart raced, the weight of their eyes upon him both grounding and exhilarating. The first murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, tender and fragile like the dawn itself. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting shafts of light upon the gathering, Gideon sensed a shift in the air, a collective inhalation of hope. The townspeople began to shake, voices rising and falling like the rhythm of their own heartbeats, weaving tales that shimmer with vulnerability and strength. Beside him, his mentor offered a small, proud smile, a silent acknowledgement of the journey ahead. Yet laughter mingled with tears, and the promise of reconciliation hung thick like morning mist. Gideon felt a latent unease settle in his chest, a whisper of doubt that perhaps the path to peace was not as clear as it seemed. The shadows of the past were not yet vanquished, and Gideon knew that their emerging unity would soon be tested, at the first fragile buds of spring braving the final chill of winter.